There we go.
Oh, wow.
That's you.
No, that's on me.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Come
It's your computer.
Not me, that's for sure.
I thought.
Okay. Remote folks, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yes, but you're a little echoey.
Hopefully that will reduce. Is this better now, Leonard?
Yes, much better. Thank you, Mark.
Fantastic. Good to hear from you, Leonard.
Oh,
And you sound good to us in the room.
yes.
So from the look of things, we have a lot of people here, but we are missing some, so we might have some people filter in for time. But let's go ahead and get started with the meeting. Before we get officially started, I want to say one thing very quickly. I've been talking to the area director in the background a lot. I've been having some conversations with folks. He's been having conversations with folks about the relationship that I have with my employer, and if there's some concern about that. And so I just wanted to clarify where I sit in the history that I have here. I started this work more than a year ago, mostly out of personal interest. There was a small impetus from Cloudflare, and there was some interest back then. But I mean, Gary had the workshop, was that Prague?
Yeah.
Prague. And that's what really sparked it for me. Beyond those initial activities, that's pretty much the extent of Cloudflare's involvement in live participation here. My colleagues and my manager understand that my role here is separate from what they're doing, and they respect that. So I'm not representing their interests, and my actions have been independent of that work that they're doing. I think most of the long-term IETF people in the room understand that's normal, that you wear different hats for different activities, and you keep your activities separate. But I know we also have a lot of new participants who that's not so familiar, and I don't want to expect people to understand that without questioning it. So from my perspective, I just want to see this work succeed. And when we started, chairing the group was the most substantial way I could help do that. But I don't want my relationship with my employer to become distraction from the work. And I don't want to rely solely on my reputation in the community to address any perceived bias in that. So like I said, I've been talking to the area director. We've been discussing ways to try and address that to make sure this work has the best chance of success. If anybody wants to talk further about that, please come talk to me or talk to the area director, and we may be making some changes.
Who is our area director?
Mike Bishop, Ackbar.
Good morning.
I know it is. Hello, Mike.
Yes, it's
Oh,
3:19.
no, what time is it, Mike?
3 a.m.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yes, you can talk to me at IETF meetings, send me an email, whatever the most immediate way to reach me.
Okay. So now I have to figure this out. There we are. So let's get started. This is the note well. These are the policies under which we participate in the meetings. And since we do have a lot of folks who are less familiar with the IETF, I'm going to go through them in a little more detail than usual. These are basically referencing our processes for how we make decisions and how we operate our meetings and our work. But it's also things like the anti-harassment procedures and the code of conduct. It also regards things like intellectual property and the fact that when you're making contributions, you're making certain commitments about patents and copyright. There's also a privacy policy. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded. It'll eventually be put up onto YouTube. So if you're not familiar with these, please make sure you are. They're very important. And if you have questions, you can talk to me, you can talk to Shresh, you can talk to Mike, you can talk to some of the other IETF folks who are doing. Okay. So let's get through some logistics really quickly. Local facilities, the toilets are behind that door right over there. You have to go out and go through another door, and then they'll be on your right. To get back in, you'll need to knock loudly on the door, and hopefully the people on the other side of it will open it for you.
There's also a path to the reception, and then you can go.
That's right. You can also go out through the reception and back in through the way you came.
And that's on badge. So
Thank you. The network is Google Guest. There's no chapter portal or any kind of fun like that, so just get into Google Guest. We have remote participants. What's our current remote participant count?
It's about 15.
15? Okay, great.
Some of them are local, so, you know.
Of
we have
course.
6 or 7 housing.
So what we're going to do is we're going to ask people when we're having discussions to queue using MeetEcho, and that way we can make it equitable for the folks who are remote. So if you aren't already, please log into MeetEcho using the local tool, and that allows you to get on the queue and get into the chat and things like that. Just make sure you're not you don't have your audio on, because that will create that echo that's so unpleasant for everyone. If you're not familiar with MeetEcho or don't quite know how to get into there, the links are on the agenda. And you do need a data tracker account, and there's also a link to create a data tracker account if you don't already have one. So please spend a little time to make sure you're logged into MeetEcho. When we're having discussions, again, to help accommodate remote folks, this is a very awkward, long, skinny room. So if you could speak very loudly and clearly, one at a time, and keep the microphone, where you have a microphone will be passing around, keep it close to your mouth so that you get good projection. And when you speak, please identify yourself. So people know who you are, and if you have an affiliation you want to list, please do so as well. More people. Hello, we're just getting started.
Mark, the link to meeting arrangements and data tracker is broken.
The meeting,
Link to meeting arrangements and data tracker is broken.
Yeah, if you did the agenda one.
the agenda, not the arrangements.
Click on agenda, then the link in there for some reason. Yeah, I know, not great.
No, I did click on agenda. Okay, well, the link in meeting arrangements in the agenda is broken.
Okay, we'll look at that.
And I can find it, just, you know.
We need scribes for the meeting. Do we have any volunteers? Thank you. So there should be a link at the top of the agenda for the notes. And if folks could help them out, that'd be really appreciated. The more eyes we have on the minutes, the more accurate they're going to be. Okay. So, agenda for the meeting. What we thought we'd do is start with a quick overview of where we think we're at as a group. So, first, you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay. And what we want to do for this meeting is have really focus on a discussion of what our potential paths for the work are, and make sure that we come to some sort of notion of what direction we think we need to go in. And then depending on where that ends up, we'll start discussing the issues as necessary. Make sense to everybody? It's a very vague, high-level kind of agenda, but we're in an uncertain place right now, and we need to figure out where we are, basically. Okay. So let's do that overview. So, after the Brussels meeting, like I said, we appeared to have convergence. We had some momentum toward shipping the documents on that fairly aggressive schedule that we had in our chart of milestones. But since then, we've had a lot of folks join us. We've had new perspectives and a lot more input, and I just heard smack them. It wasn't apparent then how strong the disagreements in the group were, but now we see that very clearly, and the working group last call has failed. So, as I said before, what we want to do in this meeting is to identify what we think the best path forward is based on where we're at. And that's the one that we think has the best chance of succeeding. And again, we have to link it back to the charter. The charter says we're here to standardize building blocks that allow the expression of preferences on how content is collected and processed for artificial intelligence model development, deployment, and use. So, if we look at the landscape we have right now, it seems like we have very different levels of agreement on different things. And these are just the impressions that Suresh and I have. This isn't a declaration of consensus or lack thereof. This is just where we think we're at right now. The AI training preference, that general area, it seems like we might be able to get to consensus with some further discussion. We don't hear a lot of pushback on it except for some definitional aspects, which I first brought up. And the search carve-out needs some discussion. The AI and use preference, the use and inference preference, we don't seem to have much consensus, and it seems like it's going to need a lot of discussion to get somewhere interesting. That's probably around this cluster of discussion around purposes that started to come up. The top level or the umbrella preference, again, we're seeing a little agreement that needs substantial discussion if we're going to move forward with that. And then there's a bunch of open questions and issues around the overall model of what's in the draft right now and the context around it. For example, this section 3.2 question, the hierarchy question, and things like that would need to be discussed as well. So These are all relative. I say that, it seems like it's possible to get consensus on AI training, but that's just relative to the other ones. That seems the most promising area of all the things we have right now. And thinking back, when we started this after the workshop in DC, for those of you who were there, we thought we saw a way forward, that there was a broad agreement that allowing people to express their preferences would actually help everyone in the ecosystem, not just one side or one kind of participant in the ecosystem. And so, the state of the world back then, and still now, is that it's very difficult to express any kind of preferences. You have to go and understand how each crawler is behaving, and target it, and give it some directives, and there's a lot of confusion about that. So cutting through that and improving that is why we started this. And in that regard, any improvement over the status quo is a significant progress. If you look at that versus where we are right now in the world, it's bad for a lot of people in the websites. So to get to consensus, to actually ship something, we need some level of support for things. And that means working through any objections that come up. And that's going to take some considerable time on a lot of these issues. In Brussels, we seem on track to be able to do that by the milestone, as I said before. But recently in the discussions, it's not really clear that we still have that sense of urgency. In Brussels, we kind of had that discussion. It was broad agreement that, yes, let's do this quickly, let's get it out there. And we thought we could do that. I think we need to revisit that assumption. And so this is where we want to kind of kick off the discussion. What we'd like to start with is first of all, is our charter still fit for purpose? Is it achievable? Do we need to make changes to make it reasonable? And can we actually come to agreement on what they might look like and take that to the ISG? Second of all, what's that sense of urgency? Do we need to deliver something soon? Is that something we really want to see out in the next few months? Or is that urgency past and we're happy to take more time to figure this out? And third of all, it'd be good to have discussion of the staging of our deliverables, whether we need to ship everything at once, whether we can stage it out and say, let's do just the absolute minimal thing, or we think we can get a relatively easy consensus, and then add to that over time, and what the nuances around that are. And so what we thought we might do, if I can drive this thing, is do a few polls. Has everyone gotten on to MeetEcho?
We'll find the on-site tool. If someone could paste it in the MeetEcho chat, then I can find it.
I just use things poll.
Is there the browser version? I'm only getting the full.
No, I have video, which we don't need, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some link that gives you, isn't there an on-site tool version with no video?
No, I don't know.
The on-site version was for the internet. I think for interims, obviously. So I think you just use the whole.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
video.
So we-
Yes, let's waste through both bandwidth. Okay,
Mute local volume.
No, it's Google has plenty of that.
it's true. Also my processor, but yeah.
You can pause the video. If you
Okay, yeah. Look at that.
Okay. So
That's what I couldn't find.
get moving tool out here.
Oh, I could mark down again.
Sorry.
If I could pause you in real life, Mark. I'm sure
Oh,
it's
the
the same one.
technology.
I'm sure it's the same one.
There is a way to get.
that's it.
So on-site version.
That's what I was trying to do, but I gave up. I'm just going to pay attention to work.
Yeah, pay attention.
I don't know if that's wise, but let's start with that. Okay, so we're going to do a show of hands in the tool. The remote folks can do this too. And our first question is it possible to achieve consensus and meet our chartered goals in some form? I'm not talking about the specifics of it, but just do you still have a sense that this work is possible within the scope of our contract? And so it's yes, no, and no opinion. And it should be up now, and I'm seeing people voting, which is a good sign. Then I'll give it another 30 seconds. Is anybody having trouble getting on to the still? Okay, I'll give it more time.
The secret trick is you go to the main agenda for the and click on the link there, not the normal Meet Echo one, because computers.
How do I know if I'm in the downside one versus trash?
Yeah, the video, that's the main.
You don't fit into the one on the main one.
So just
Just why don't you write the URL on the whiteboard?
if you click in the top,
That's convenient.
with the video, that's the video.
What is it about?
Top left of the video. There's a little pause thing, that's all.
That's a little creepy.
It's very creepy, but it's my job.
There's paid to be scared.
Cool, thank you. How are we going over there? Anyone? Okay,
21, 3, and 9.
so right now we're at 21 yes, 3 no's, and 9 no opinions. So the interesting part here, especially I think, is for the no's. Does anybody want to say why they voted no? Give some more information. It's fine if you don't. Just it does help. I noticed there's a microphone in Ecker's.
No, in case someone nearly.
Okay.
I'm not going to speak. I'm not now.
Okay,
I'm in no opinion.
Yes, Ecker's pretty shy.
Yeah.
that's true. Okay, I'm going to turn to 24, 3, and 11. Okay, so that's information. Next question. Just a statement. Our charter has the appropriate scope. In other words, the charter is fit for purpose. We don't need to change it. If you believe that it's good as it is, please vote yes. If you think that our charter needs to change in some fashion for us to be successful, please say no. And again, no opinion.
Can I suggest that maybe we put the charter up on the screen?
Yes.
I can try to do that.
I'd like to read the charter now, so yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Let's see. Can someone put the link in the chat actually? Because that's probably the easiest way to get it for remote folks. And I'll put it.
Let me do it, Mark. I'll do it.
It's in the chat right now.
Fantastic.
Make her put it up.
Yeah, we both have market. Which one I do?
Screen sharing is hard. And actually, I'll make it bigger because the radio on itself is not going to be that really.
You want me to?
So the Ad Preference Work Group will standardize building blocks that allow for the expression of preferences about how content is collected and processed for artificial intelligence model development, deployment, and use. There are many ways that preferences regarding content may be expressed. The working group will focus on attaching preferences to content either by including preferences in content metadata or by signaling preferences using a protocol that delivers content. We'll deliver standards track for the vocabulary, independent of how those preferences associated with content, standards track documents for attachments, and then a standard method for reconciling multiple preferences. And we're up to 12 yes, 12 no, and 6 no opinions.
So Mark, I actually started looking at this list of non-goals,
Yes.
and I mean, I'm probably just nitpicking, but I'm wondering if we already need a registry. But I'm sure we can solve that problem if we actually needed one.
Well, so the backstory there is, in the discussions, there was interest in registries at the workshop and then beyond, but people also had architectural concerns about registries on the internet. And so the idea is that registries may be possible within this framework, but they wouldn't be defined by the IETF.
So let me just be, maybe I don't know what you mean by registry. So like we have, AI training, blah, right? And are you saying that there's no registry of those terms?
Oh, no, sorry, that's a registry of claims, of preferences.
Isn't that what this text says?
No, that's a vocabulary register.
Okay, well, if everybody agrees that doesn't preclude having a registry of these terms, then I don't.
Not at all. No, that's not the intent. That's not the reason I think that it was found. Yes, Paul.
Can people please introduce themselves when they speak?
And can they use
I'm
my
Paul,
Okay, I was asking that people please introduce themselves when they speak. There's a couple of new faces here.
Yeah.
It's useful for everyone.
Would it be useful to do introductions?
Yeah,
I was thinking about that. We do have a
Wasn't
large
it?
number of remote folks, but it may be worthwhile. Perhaps before the break?
it was on the agenda, wasn't it?
No.
It says welcome introductions.
Oh, that's. They did their introductions.
Okay, I
So,
don't care.
so Edgar, this is Krishna. So like the registry that I was talking about, there's like actually registry-based approaches, so where you would take a piece
Okay.
of content and you go look up a registry and see what people said about it.
Okay.
Like that's kind
Well,
of.
I'm not arguing at this moment about the ethical question. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that doesn't preclude what I think the ethical question is.
Okay, so let's get back to the discussion then, if that's clarified. We got 15 yes, 15 no, and 5 no opinion. Again, the interesting question here is the no's. What do people think when they voted no?
So, Warren, before you go for a second, I think Joe said on the chat that one significant concern is the chat is too broad, covering how content is collected rather than limited to use, among other concerns. So, Jude, is that something you wanted to come state at the mic, or is that, I just want to take it as input and continue?
I'm just figuring out this tool, so I'm a little slow.
Sounds good. You just have there's a hand sign with a cross across it. If you just click on it, you're gonna get in the queue after Max. Thank you. Yeah, Warren, go.
Yeah, I think I'm close enough to the mic, so I'll just shout. It's unclear when you say appropriate scope. Are you meaning should it be narrower, should it be wider, right? One can always find issues with the scope. So I wasn't quite sure how to vote, so I didn't.
Try to interpret is can we deliver something useful with the control we have? Or
And
can
this
we- Sure. Max.
Good morning from New York. I hope you can hear me well. I am hearing a little bit of echo, so I hope that's just me.
Well, it's us.
Okay. I was one of the no votes, but I would like to caveat that. I think the issues with the scope are minimal and have little to do with the intention of the original scope, but rather based on the learnings from the last 9 months or so of work and the, as Mark put it, the lack of consensus. I think there are small adjustments that could be made. I would trust the chairs to say whether it's worth opening up the charter to litigate small nuances, or whether that would put us too far behind in terms of trying to get the work done. So I wish there was yes, no just a little, and no a lot options, so I could get a better understanding of where the group is at. But I think I can trust the chairs to make that evaluation throughout the conversation today.
Our interest really here is if people think the charter is drastically not fit for purpose, let's have that discussion. If it's just small tweaks or interpretations, that's something that's much more normal that we don't have to spend a lot of working group time on.
So Max, if you kind of go ahead and tell us what kind of things you want, because the re-charter takes a long time. Even if it's just any minor tweaks in the charter might take quite a bit of time. Because
Sure.
it needs to go to Mike and go to the IESG. So it's not just Mike signing off on it. It's the whole steering group that needs to sign off on it. So if it's something that, as Mark said, if it's not drastically different, I think we can kind of justify doing that. But if it's something major, we do need to do it. I think that's kind of where we have to figure out. It's more like a judgment call rather than something that's set in stone.
Would you like me to respond now or re-queue?
Now is good.
Okay. Didn't want to jump on procedure. Sorry. One small nuance that I hope was reflected in my email last week. In the second point of the deliverables, the standard track document describes means of attaching or associating those preferences, and specifically like what we standardize within the group. I think the difficulties of standardizing and even agreeing on what level of standardization and the to one of the points that Mark's raised is like the overall questions of do we need to agree on everything to start with or not, which I think is a pretty central question. Means that it would be useful to talk about patching preferences that have been expressed by website owners that are not fully. And to me, that feels like a small nuance and something that's easy to add in. Others might disagree. But that's an example of a small tweak that I think would be within scope, but is not written directly into the scope. Is that a useful example?
It is. I guess I'm just, one of the things here is that we need to get broad agreement of some sort that the charter change is necessary. And so if that is contentious enough that we might as well have the, discussion in the group, it doesn't just so likely to change the charter.
Sure. Thanks.
And I suspect that that's one of those ones that would struggle to get agreement.
Right, and nothing stops us from going ahead and working on this after, initial little rules are finished, right? So I think the part of this, doing this process is to also collect things for the next iteration of the working group once these items are delivered. So that would be certainly something that we can start collecting in, right? I think Mark already talked about it. So part of it is this process is also collecting what we're not doing. So then we can consider them in the future.
Sir, microphone over there.
Thank you, Karen.
I'm Farzan Abadi. I run Digital Medusa, which tries to help access to knowledge and internet globally. So I was okay with the charter from in the beginning, but there was a conversation a few weeks ago where Leonard mentioned that the vocabulary is designed to be used in any scenario, online or offline. And that, if people have that impression, I think that we need to have a discussion about it, because I don't think the vocabulary should signal preferences for what happens offline. And so I think that should be much narrower. It should be clearer what we are doing here. Yeah.
Pedro, if you're ready, you can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so nice to meet you all. I'm Pedro Suarez, a principal research scientist at the Concord Foundation. So I've been reading most of the drafts and the mailing list, but I haven't participated so far. So this is the first time. Probably you met my colleague Tom, I think he's there. But so one thing that I wanted to say about the charter, maybe, because I come from more of a technical background, so I did a PhD in natural language processing, and I specialize in training LLMs and developing LLMs that lower resource whatever. Is that I think there's a main problem with the way the charter is written, is that it is focusing too much in this AI term. And I know there were some discussions in the mailing list about how we define AI. I think there was a consultation with the experts as well. And at some point, the experts also said that they didn't want to define this term. And it's, because coming from this area, we normally don't have a clear definition for what is artificial intelligence. in fact, the research community doesn't use artificial intelligence. We say machine learning, we speak of deep learning, of transformer models, of specific technologies, but almost no researcher speaks of artificial intelligence. So my feeling reading the discussion and reading the draft is that this is creating a massive problem because the vague definition of this term is not allowing the current draft and the current discussion to actually talk about specific problems or specific issues with the technologies. So I think there's, I mean, from a technical point of view, and from the point of view of somebody that will then have to take whatever comes out of the working group and implement it technically. I think there's a big problem on this AI term and on the definition.
Thank you. So, thank you, Pedro. So your comment kind of reminds me a lot of, I think, what Krishna was saying a while back, in that, focusing on AI is, if I'm interpreting what we're saying correctly, perhaps a red herring, and that focusing on the purpose that you're using AI for is more interesting. And I think one way to look at this charter is we focus on AI without really understanding that it's more nuanced than that. So that's an interesting thread to pull. I'm not sure how much will come apart if we pull it, but it's an interesting thread to pull.
Maybe if I made, there was at some point, I think it was Eric Rescorle, if I'm not mistaken, that proposed vocabulary that was more focused on the uses of these technologies than on the actual backend or the implementation of the technology. And I have to say that from a technical point of view, from somebody that would like to implement it, that makes far more, that makes way more sense.
Pedro, just one more question. In that kind of view of the world, would you consider training an AI model or training a model to be one of those uses? Can you look at that lens?
So the problem is that one of the current problems that I see with training or AI is that the industry and the research community has already moved on that. So training, pre-training, we call it pre-training. So let's think for a moment about text, but it's more or less the same thing for images. You take a big database of text, let's say, or a big collection of text, and then you just train a model to predict the next one. So you're reading text and predicting the next one. That doesn't have any usage at all. So pre-trained models, like if a company tomorrow wants to deploy that in production, that doesn't have any use. Like, users are not going to like that kind of stuff. So the products that you're seeing are now being the things that are fine-tuned, and that would fall more into the things that you have been discussing in this inference category. Because what is happening there is that they are actually paying humans or using just the data from the users of these models to fine-tune them so that they follow these conversational patterns, or that they follow these instruction or request and answer patterns. And then what is happening is that the model is capable of generating or doing things, let's say, in the style of or are similar to, without ever being retrained. So we can take, I don't know, an article from a publisher that the model was never trained on, use it in inference, and then create a derivative workflow. Very easy. So I think there's the pre-training part or the AI training still has some validity, but there are other issues that are appearing technically right now that I think the draft and the charter are not covering.
Thank you.
Lauren Kamari. So, I mean, I'll note that writing polls is really hard. I still think it's very tricky to answer this because it's unclear if we were to recharter, if we'd be talking about making it broader or narrower. Right? Like as Suresh noted, if we open this can of worms, it's likely to have to go through the IESG, etc. And if we hope to ever actually get anything done, I think making it narrower so we can actually accomplish something, and then after that's done, rechartering to make it broader would be reasonable, or just leaving it alone. I think if we open a can of worms and make it broader now, it's going to be incredibly hard to get consensus on a charter.
So we can narrow our own deliverables without changing the charter. You know, we can say we're going to deliver this first and then revisit other things later if we want to, without any change to these words at all. This is more just to get a very high level check of, are we still in the right ballpark with the chart? Do we need to change from AI to the purpose-based stuff, for example, stuff like that?
Yeah.
And from my perspective, we've got interesting information here that a lot of people think that now we probably need to make a change. I don't want to spend too much time on this right now because we're not going to try and change the charter right now. What I'd like to do is spend a couple of days figuring out where we are on everything. And then if we end up in a place where, oh, yes, we in this room see that we probably need a new charter, we can start that process.
And I mean, I agree, we can agree to just do a subset of it now, and without formally rechartering, but we do need to then figure out if we're doing that and clearly communicate we're not going to stray into these other bits, and that would like
For now.
chairs decide. Yeah, for now. And then once we've got something done, you know, extensions, clarifications.
We're at a little more of a basic state right now. We're trying to figure out if anything's possible in the next couple of days, and then figure out what we need to do to actually act upon that at the end, hopefully. Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul Keller. That discussion sort of solved half of the points I wanted to raise. I thought it might be more useful to rephrase the question, do we need to change the charter in order to continue our work or not? Because there were remarks indeed that said everybody has probably nitpicks with elements of the charter. So is this really like a blocker for us, or is this something that can be dealt with in the way that you just described? The other point I wanted to make is I think we need to go back where we're coming from. And this was we were chartered to provide content owners and web publishers with a way to express their preferences with regards to AI training. And I heard what Pedro said, and I sort of like, I think there's some truth in it, but like these are preferences expressed by content owner. If we expect them to sort of completely understand state-of-the-art technological processes, like we're over asking, and they will not be able to express coherent preferences. I think in the sense of that this is about expressions of preferences, we also need to accept that in the eyes of very many participants in the room, or many participants in that particular market, these preferences may not make sense. They may express something which is their preference, and that doesn't make sense, and that's still a valid expression of a preference, and we have some mechanisms and things to say like, okay, maybe you want to ignore that, or maybe you want to sort of inform them otherwise that they are shooting themselves into their own foot, and they may reconsider later. But I think the act that we're trying enabling is a standardized expression of preferences, regardless in how far they understand the technology or not.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, you're Squirrel of the Georgetown Institute. I mean, I think to the sort of process point, I think it's important to remember, as Mark was indicating, the charter provides boundaries of what the working group can do. And so, you know, often in the beginning, before the working group charter, people want to bake in a lot of great decisions, but now we have the charter. And so I think, you know, as long as we're allowed to do what you think we can do, then like try to read the charter, like try to read the charter to make it more required than the thing you want to do if you already can. It's just the work of the working group anyway, so that's not really helpful. So really, you know, I think the reason you would need a charter change would be if there's something you thought we should do in this area, the charter included. To that end, I don't think the charter precludes doing something more like Krishna proposed, this display-based thing, I think it's completely permissible. I note the word training only appears once in the charter in a list of things that are out of scope, not a list of things that are in scope. And so you could be, I think you could absolutely be something that was completely different that didn't have any of the current structure that would be in the charter. Now, the working group might run out like that, that's a different story.
So the only thing that gives me pause there is the phrasing around expression preferences that competence collection process for artificial intelligence.
Oh, I agree. It has to have artificial intelligence in there somewhere, I think. And I think if you, I mean, to give you a concrete example, if what I think what would not be in scope would be if you said, if you had an expression that included snippets and AI overviews together, it'd be hard to understand how snippets fit.
I think that's where Krishna's going.
So perhaps Krishna's name would have to revise somewhat, but I do think snippets and AI overviews are distinguishable. And in fact, people I talk to in industry seem to think they're different things and are happy with snippets. In some cases, unhappy with AI overviews. So I think you could find a way to separate them. The final thing I want to say is, sort of in response to Paul's statement a minute ago, I agree some level of ambiguity is sort of essential, is sort of going to be inherent here because the technology is moving so fast. But on the other hand, I think it's important to keep the context in mind that people are already talking about this becoming effectively mandatory, not by us, but by other people. And if we have text here that is ambiguous and hard to understand and then becomes mandatory, that is bad news. And so I particularly want to, I mean, the worst case scenario here, it's not that we do nothing, but that we give people a vocabulary to say things. And a lot of people say things that are not in fact what they need to say, and then have to be mandatorily processed by people, and we're going through a halt. That's the worst case scenario of not doing nothing. So I think that all this text about how you don't have to follow the rules doesn't actually help if it gets mandated somewhere else.
Giving people sharp tools is not good.
Exactly. Thank you.
Felix.
Thank you. I do think there is a use case of narrowing the charter under certain circumstances, and that is if after a lot of discussion we have agreed that we don't want to go down a particular route, just to preclude the same discussion from being started over and over again. I don't think that's the point to do at the beginning of the meeting, but perhaps if by Thursday we agree that we don't want to go a particular route, it might be useful to recharter that, just to preclude just starting over again every time that we have another meeting. I would like to echo the point that Fars has made about possibly excluding offline users, because I do think a lot of the concerns that have come up around the impact of these preferences on users' rights have to do with things that people are doing on their own computer, kind of in their own remit, for example, like using accessibility technologies and things like that. So I think it might be useful to actually, instead of just saying AI use, which is kind of what the charter currently is saying, to narrow that down a little bit to online users or how content is displayed in the context of AI use online, and not something that somebody is doing on their own computer, maybe by running a model locally or something like that, which I think should be firmly out of scope.
So just to respond to one thing you said, we can kind of mark milestones and make sure that we are moving towards convergence by doing explicit consensus calls. We don't have to rewrite the charter to do that. Leonard.
There we go. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the statement that was made earlier about what was the possible worst case. And I want to preface by going back to Paul's comments about how we got this group started, which was, and the reason we focused on vocabulary, which is that today we already have multiple vocabularies and quote standards trying to address this particular use case. And we felt that it was necessary to have one standard vocabulary, and that this group would be the group to do that standardization, so that then all of the other attachment models could reference one single vocabulary and they would all be aligned. Because today is the worst case scenario, which is too many standards all using different vocabulary and not having them aligned.
Thanks, Leonard. Okay. One more question, I think a little more straightforward. Just to check, if it's still urgent that we deliver something soon, and just to put a date in people's minds, something like end of the year this year, and that's very fuzzy. Just a gut check. We're interested to see how many people think this is, there's that sense of urgency is going. So we're about 50-50 again. A little more on the nose. Okay, let's give it just another moment. So we're 12 yeses, 17 no's, and 4 no opinions. 18 no's now. 19 and then. Okay, and closing the poll. I don't think we need much discussion on that. That's good, just about the data. Another one, we want to get a sense of one of the things when you have a longer scheduled working group, you want to make sure that you get consistent engagement. One of the failure modes for work is basically exhaustion when people get sick of doing the work and go away. And so we want to make sure that you know, if we do extend this work further, that we still have people around.
Yeah, so one of the things like Mark and I did, let's talk to Mike to push the milestones by a year. So if you notice, like we went from August 25 to 26, right? But the reason we're asking this question is we don't want to be in the same position like next July, right? Like where we are not doing stuff. So I think like the idea is to kind of get the discussions going now. If we still have a sense of urgency, even though we're not delivering anything urgently, I think that's like Mark's intermediate deadline is like, hey, can we get a small piece knocked off first before we go to the next step, right? And maybe we can, maybe we can't. But the idea of this August 2026 deadline is to have like 3 meeting cycles, so people from every geography has a chance to participate in like a physical meeting if needed, to have the high bandwidth discussions, but also to kind of like get some intermediate checkpoints done as well, right? Like because as you notice, like and we talked about, right, we were kind of going like all the time towards like something, and then we kind of scattered again, right? Like so, I think the idea is like kind of to keep, even if we have like slow progress, to kind of consistently move in one direction. And I think like the earlier we establish the baseline for that, the better for that, I guess.
And it's not really a deadline. It's just we're trying to set some expectations for people in terms of their planning. You know, if we do this for 5 years, that's going to have a very different kind of person participating potentially, and it may not be successful as a result. And also, one of the things that we're seeing is some amount of turnover in participation, and then we get new people coming on, then they have to climb that ramp of getting up to speed with all the work, and so we'll make sure we have as much consistency of participation as we can, realizing, of course, that always people can join us as they go on. So this is really just getting an idea of whether people are willing to commit for a period of time. We're going to ask 2 forms of this question very quickly, one for 6 months and one for a year. And so here's the first one, 6 months. And this is, again, you personally, not your company or your sponsor. This is about the people who are actually here. Okay, well, let's see those yeses go up. That's great. I will get ready with the next version of this, which is for 1 year. I'm going to cut it off in just a moment because I think we have the point now. Everyone want to be at the 30th? No? Okay. Oh, good. I'll cut it off. So, same thing, just a 1 year timeline. Okay. A little bit of difference. Still strong showing, but a few notes. So, I understand that people are wary of committing to that amount of time. And we just have one more poll, and then we'll maybe go right into instructions and then take a break, I think. That's all right? Okay. All right, I'm going to cut this one off because I think we get the point. Last poll. This is about how we stage our workouts. And the assertion is we should focus on a minimal training preference and ship that, and then shift to other preferences and then ship those. So it's staging the workout, which is, there's been some background discussion of that as a way to make some progress. I'm interested to see how people feel about that as a way to prove that we can work and iterate, basically. Okay, so we're seeing 23, 10, and 1, 24, 10, and 1. All right, I'm going to close it pretty soon.
There's another one.
70 volts, I know, sorry. All right, almost going to close. Last check. Okay. So that's 26, 12, and 1. Well, we're just on. We're trying
distribution of organizations in the room, like I think.
So, Paul, to be clear, we're not making decisions here. We're just gathering information to seed some discussion. That's all we're doing. And so that's an interesting one because it's 2 to 1-ish that more on yes to no. So I think what we might do now is let's do a round of introductions, go to a break, and then come back and maybe dissect that last poll a little bit and understand why people essentially voted no. So I'll start. My name is Mark Nottingham. I work for Cloudflare, although in this room I do not have anything to do with it. Sorry. And I'm a member of the IETF. Sure. Oh yeah, let's pass the microphone.
Hey, my name is Suresh Krishnan. I'm a co-chair of this working group, also a member of the IAB. I work for Cisco. And yeah, as far as I know, we don't have too much business in this space at this point. So I'm fairly cool with that.
Martin Thompson. I'm an engineer at Mozilla. I've been editing the specs and someone's pointing a camera at me, which is great. I'll turn this one.
Hi, I'm Paul Keller. I'm editor for the vocabulary draft, and I'm with Open Future, a policy-focused think tank that works mainly in Europe.
Hi, I'm Felix Rieder. I work at GitHub, and this is what I do for fun.
Hello, I'm Tom Vaughan. I'm principal software engineer. What am I? Principal engineer at the Common Core Foundation. I work with Pedro, who was on the call earlier.
Crystal Lang, senior product director at Elsevier Publishing.
Michael, the product team at Cloudflare, and I've been building websites and things into for many years.
Hi, I'm Leah Ram. I'm a product counsel at Cloudflare.
Hi, I'm Brad Silva. I work for a company called Advance, which is the parent of Condé Nast, and I work in public policy focusing on AI and IP.
I'm Chris Needham. I'm with the BBC, working in internet standards and policy.
Hi, Ronnie Shalit, representing the Alliance for Responsible Data Collection and also Roy Data.
Hi, it's Sonia Cooper. I work at Microsoft.
Krishna Madhavan, Microsoft.
Sebastian Post with Elysium. I'm Caleb Donaldson. I'm a copyright lawyer at Google.
Mike Jones, I'm an independent consultant.
Warren Kamari, Google. I'm on the Internet Architecture Board, and I'm mostly here because Google security wants one Googler for every 10 visitors.
Hi, I'm Farzan Badi. I'm a recovering academic. I have a digital Medusa, which works on access to the internet and public knowledge.
Mia Kudovan, Alex.
Errol Prescorla, First Institute.
Hi, Mark Gray. I'm a copyright lawyer for OpenAI, and this is my first IETF meeting, so hello.
Welcome.
I'm Kevin Kelly. I'm a member of technical staff at Anthropic. And I'm not doing things like this. I work in a retraining group.
I'm Daniel Akovich. I'm a copyright lawyer at Anthropic.
Morning, Kevin Snell at Amazon. I'm on the AGI legal team.
Good morning, Malika Rufai. I cover IP and AI issues at Meta, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague James.
Well, James Wymark, I'm a lawyer. So.
I guess this is the legal table because I'm Erin Simon. I'm a product counsel for search at Google.
We'll say that.
Hi everyone, I'm Irina. I work at OpenMind. We are working on technical enforcement of this type of preferences, and yeah, it's also my first time here.
Gary from Google, editor for the attachment trap, and generally doesn't know what he's doing.
I'll second that.
And online folks, if you could introduce yourselves roughly by alphabetical order of your first names, like it's listed in Mideco, at least for me.
I think that means that I'm first. So, hi everyone, I'm Brendan Crick. I'm Managing Director of AIPREF. We do embedded metadata in photos and videos. We have a vocabulary that's already being used to express these preferences.
Okay, let's see who's next.
Christos, I think you're up next.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Principal Tech Advisor at the ICO in the UK, data protection.
Hi, this is Elaine Bailey, Amazon Web Services.
Fabrice?
Oh, I saw Fabrice for a moment.
Fabrice, we didn't hear you.
Fabrice Cannon, Microsoft.
Jacob? Okay. Jacob typed in the chat, he's public interest technologist at ESF.
Huh.
Welcome, Jacob. Joe?
Hi, Joe Levy from Alliance for Responsible Data Collection.
Johannes?
Hi, Johannes Monterey, consultant from News Media Alliance.
John?
Hi, I'm John Wheeler. I work on search at Google.
Strong. Leonard?
Hi, Leonard Rosenthal, Chief Architect for Content Authenticity at Adobe and chair of the technical working group of the C2PA.
Mark?
Mark's in the group.
Mark's there. What's
Great.
Oh.
Next.
Max?
Good morning again. My name is Max Kemner. I work on tech standards and policy at News Corp.
Mike, have you introduced yourself?
Pedro?
Hi, I'm Pedro T. Suarez, and I'm Principal Research Scientist at the Common Crawl Foundation.
Sarah? Over.
Morning,
Sarah?
Sarah, working on Internet Standards at the UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Thomas Eno?
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm from the Software Heritage. We are coding a lot of source code.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else we missed online?
Hi, Sarah McKenna from Alliance for Responsible Data Collection at Swinton.
That's weird. Let's see, Sarah. Oh, there she is. Okay. Hi, Sarah. Okay, so it's 10:16. Let's take a 20-minute break. Go out, get something to drink, have a chat, and we'll come back here at 35 past the hour and continue that discussion. One of the things we encourage everyone to do is during these breaks, during the lunches, in the evenings, spend time talking to people who aren't like you, especially in terms of who you work for. Part of the reason we all get together physically in the same place is to build those relationships so we understand other people's perspectives and we can have better online discussions. Okay, so back here in 20 minutes. Oh, and let me mute this.
Yes. 1 hour. It's just
Okay, all right, let's get started again.
I'm very happy.
So we finished up on a poll asking about, let's see if I can get back up here really quickly. Asking about staging the workout effectively. We should focus on a minimal training preference and ship that, and then shift to shipping other preferences. And we had 26 yes on that, 12 no, and 1 no opinion. So a bit more than 2 to 1 in favor of that kind of approach. And I know this has been brought up before as a potential strategy. It has the merit of allowing us to focus on a much smaller piece of work, get that out the door, and prove we can actually do something together, and then repeating that model, I guess. So the 12 folks who voted no, if anyone's willing, it would be great to hear from you as to why you think that isn't a good way forward for us, so we can have that discussion. Anybody want to put their hand up for that? Yes, down that end. Okay, you got a microphone. Go for it.
Hi, Brad Silver. So I'm interested as well in whether those who think we could stop now might be motivated because stopping would mean that these additional layers of preferences are either less important, not because they're more complicated, and also if there are positions around whether or not they should even exist. That's what motivated my decision to say that we shouldn't stop now, because it seems to me that focusing only on certain elements of the life cycle of the training and deployment and operationalizing of AI models would be short-sighted, and we'd be effectively solving for a problem that I frankly think is lower-hanging fruit, but because it's lower-hanging fruit, I think makes it in some ways almost less pressing than the types of activities which are being kind of integrated into how AI models are being rolled out today, which are having a massive impact on certain kind of stakeholder interests for sure, but also are being the focus of heavy investment by AI models themselves. And so I think there is a mutual interest in having clearer preferences around that for both parties, that they know where they stand. I think that there's a lot of risk that's emerging in moving forward blindly in using content without knowing what the respective interest holder wants you to do with it. And so I think it's not just to serve the interests of the digital asset holder. It's for both sides as well.
Just one. So I don't think it's the idea here is to stop so much as how do we stage our deliverables effectively.
I agree, but sort of from a tactical and strategic perspective, it would be a way to stopping here would mean that what is left over may not happen. Eventually, if there is what you're left with is a strong objection, and the balance of where the preferences of the room sits are against that kind of preference being articulated, as opposed to the package of preferences which are before us today, where I think there is a little bit more of a holistic approach to this is what AI models are doing right now. You shouldn't address half the problem.
But so I guess I formulated it a bit differently in that if we have preference A and preference B, and we decide we can get consensus on preference A right now, but we can't get consensus on preference B right now, we can either ship A and then try and get consensus on B, or we can put everything up until we get consensus on B, and maybe we never get it, so we don't ship anything.
I think that there's a third option, which is that you try and get consensus on A and B, and if you can't get consensus on A and B, then you ship A. But it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to slice and dice things at this moment.
Eric.
I'm actually gonna back off with these guys talking.
Okay.
And get back in the queue. There was nobody else, but now I want to be at the end.
Okay.
Is there a microphone?
No.
So, Brad, I think that's a fair concern. I was one of the yeses, and sorry.
So I don't want to get into too much of a back and forth here. Go ahead and finish, but just for the rest of the queue, let's just start hearing from the nose, and then we'll have the discussion. But go ahead.
Okay. I think my perspective lines up with what the chair was saying, but I see it as a checkpoint to avoid constantly circling back and retreading old ground, not as a place to stop.
Max.
Yeah, I'd like to make two concrete points on why I think we would need to ship together. First, I don't think these definitions live in a vacuum. I think they're connected, and when you finalize scope on one, that adjusts naturally the scope on the others. I think we've seen this in a number of the conversations so far, where someone proposing to tweak one of the definitions creates an overlap or removes an overlap that existed, but then creates a separate question. And so I don't think we can do this sort of conversation piecemeal and arrive at good definitional work. The second point I'd like to raise is in regards to defaults. And I know that's partially a question of the attachment and not necessarily just the vocabulary, but given how defaults are set out in the current document, anything that is not defined leads to a very specific outcome, and I think it's not useful for the larger ecosystem if we only ship one thing and leave everything else to defaults.
Now I think it's me. Sarah, Mike.
Sorry, next. One over.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think in terms of process, I'm not like entirely sure we need an AI training preference like setting at all. I think it's gonna be hard to tell if we do until we have a more complete preference set. For the reason Max was saying. My concerns specifically at the AI training are I think basically the ones that raised the list, which is it's sort of a sideways attempt to get what I think a real issue, which is much more economic implications of this technology and about substitution and other kinds of things that solve substitution than it is about the training itself. And there are a lot of important activities which I think, one might think of as training, but don't necessarily have those implications. This is especially sort of brought the scope of the fact that we have so much difficulty defining AI. So this has the potential to pull in a lot of things, which are no one thinks of it generative AI at all. But nevertheless, I'm not get pulled into the training definitions. And I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think writing generative solves the problem either. Also, sort of the specific use of the term training is super tied to these specific technical details. We I think already heard earlier, but that's not necessarily the right way to think about this. In particular, a lot of the concern I've heard expressed in this working group is about RAG, which as far as I can tell will be brought in by this category at all. I'm not saying that everything's about RAG, but certainly especially when you're news people are much more concerned about RAG than anything else. So we have sort of a definition that's both over-inclusive and under-inclusive, which isn't a great place to be, especially as I said, when things are, when we may not be anything mandatory, but other people may well be. In general, the usual reason that I see working groups try to radically reduce scope like this is when they're stymied and have been fighting over things for a very long time, and how can we just take a W on something? That may be where we are in a year, but I don't think it's where we are now. Generally I think it's premature to try to highball something really, really small on the way of consensus.
So, we have more people now. Okay. Paul.
I was also one of the people who voted no. I think we need to, and to your comment, when people are fighting over the best way to do, I think reducing the scope may be a useful outcome, but when the disagreement is essentially about the scope, then solving that by reducing the scope to the preference of one group, for me, does not feel like a consensual outcome. And I think we're having fundamentally a disagreement about the scope of the work here, not so much about the technical expression, how to express that. That is an additional factor. It's really, really hard to express these categories, but yeah. And to your point, I think for the people who've been involved in these discussions since the beginning, it should be clear that this is also about training. There's a lot of people who want to express preferences about training, clear and simple. They are also worried about substitution and other things, but I don't think it's fair to simply state that training is not a worry that needs to be addressed by this vocabulary.
Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much agree with what Paul has just said and Brad before him. I do think, and I agree with Max, that we need to look at both sets of, we need to look at the set of definitions holistically for them all to work. And I think it needs to include some provision around training, some provision around whether we call it RAG or grounding or inference time usage. I think all of these need to be sort of developed together. And I actually don't think it's beyond the ability of this group to come up with a set of working definitions. I just don't think we've been through it. I don't think we've collectively agreed that it's in all of our interests to have those definitions. And I think that's perhaps where we're getting a little bit stuck on. But I think with more energy and effort going into the actual precision of the language that we use, I think we can come up with a set of definitions that would cover all of those, or both of those cases. And I would prefer that we do them together and look at it holistically rather than deliver one and then take the risk, as Bradley was explaining, of the work then dissipating away, perhaps.
Leonard.
Yeah, so I sort of to follow on Paul and Chris. The other reason that I voted no, that our concerns is actually related to what we talked earlier, which is burnout. I'm concerned that if we postpone some of the other preferences, that we will lose a lot of the current active participation in the group, and that while maybe that means we can get work done with less controversy, I don't believe that means we can get it done with the same level of quality. And so I would be concerned that if we try to push certain things out, it won't get done as well.
And Pedro.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, I voted yes, but I wanted to add a comment specifically about the point of training. I think the expressing preference about training is important, but the problem is that, and the reality is that the, let's say, the research community and the industry that is implementing all of these projects, and also the rights holders, are moving now in another direction. So the models and the technologies keep evolving. And yeah, we have to cover training because that's still happening. Also, to be fair, this is limited now to a small group of people that can actually do it because it remains extremely expensive. But now we also need to cover the, like, my opinion is that we also need to cover these other aspects that started appearing. And maybe to add something, a comment that Paul made a little bit like before the break is, I mean, I actually agree with the fact that we cannot make a vocabulary that it's extremely technical. I actually don't think that's the solution. I actually think that we need to simplify this thing for right holders, because right now I mean, working for the Common Code Foundation, I know that robots.txt is difficult to understand for many people. So if we here come up with a set of preferences that is extremely difficult to understand or very technical or very poorly defined, then this is going to be a problem down the road. So I actually think that if we are going to work on the scope, we need to make sure that we cover training, but that we are also looking at what is happening right now, where is the interest moving to, and also that the vocabulary and all of the definition and also the scopes are easy enough for people that are not technical to understand.
Pedro, can you clarify like what you mean by it's too technical? Like we're trying to not be too technical on this. So is there any specific concerns you have?
So okay, so I've seen. So the problem is that well, the- I don't want to go into technicalities too much, but the idea is that if I start saying like, okay, we are going to define AI, and then to define AI, let's say, okay, it's the model that requires certain amount of compute, or that have a specific technology behind it, or that use data to learn in a certain way. I think that's already too technical. Uh, right holders and webmasters and users are not going to be able to follow that kind of trend, and also the technical landscape is going to move. So for instance, if you look at definitions, I think it was the US government, the previous administration, that define certain legislation on the amount of compute needed to train a model, so the amount of flops, of teraflops, whatever. I think that's a horrible way of doing this, because one is too technical, and two, one of the things that one of the advancements that we have seen is that we require less and less compute to develop things that I don't know, 2-3 years ago needed tremendous amount of compute. So when I say too technical is we cannot go. I don't think we cannot go too deep into the actual implementation or definition of these things.
Okay. Queue is empty. Yeah. Yeah. So it looks like there's still a lot to discuss. Suresh and I were talking about what the best next step is, and from what we see right now, it's probably to just go through our issues and to look at what people have raised against the documents. Some of them are quite broad, but I think we just have to do the work and see where it gets us. I would propose we start with the more broad issues first. Paul, you have a suggestion?
I had a little bit something prepared to maybe set the stage for this.
Sure. Do you need to present?
Yes. Yeah, just say request slides and.
Might request slides because the slides are not.
Now you have share my screen.
Share screen. Send request screen share. Done. Okay. This actually, it looks better on my screen.
I hope so. It looks awful here.
Anyway, I take it that we are following the agenda that we're talking about the vocabulary today and probably tomorrow. And then,
I frankly would be a little surprised if we get to attachment.
yeah. But I think also with lots of new people in the room, it might be good to recall the purpose of the vocabulary. Why are we talking about two different documents? I think we've touched on this when we looked at the charter, which has actually 3 bullet points. Like the first one roughly corresponds with vocabulary, the second one with the attachment draft, and the third point actually is something which comes back in the vocabulary document at the moment. But the purpose of the vocabulary essentially was always this idea that we want to create a set of coherent, well-defined terms that can be used by different attachment mechanisms. And by now, there is a number of attachment mechanisms, or they don't necessarily all call themselves this way, but that are floating around this. The 2 ones in bold are the ones that we are working with, that are in scope for this working group, or that are active drafts within the working group. Vocabulary and the attachment draft. They're 2 different documents. And then we have a number of things that have either existed before we had this discussion or that have emerged while we had this discussion that also try to, that function as attachment mechanisms, so they carry preference signals, right? Like that is the IPCT plus standard, that is CP2A, actually twice here, I don't know why. It's TDM-AI, TDM-REP. We also have like newer ones are this RSL, Real Simple Licensing, and contentsignals.org, the recent Cloudflare announcement. And the purpose of the vocabulary is essentially that sort of everybody can, that each of these mechanisms can take their terms from the vocabulary and use them in the way specified by the vocabulary, which in theory makes sort of like the expressions carried in each of these attachment mechanisms, or the preference signals carried in each of these attachment mechanisms, compatible with each other, or at least they are interchangeable. They can be processed together according to interpretation of these preference signals. Now, what we're seeing, and I think that is sort of what a lot of people sort of referred in earlier conversations as it would be beneficial if there was more standardization in this space. This is the type of standardization that we're trying to achieve with the vocabulary draft. That is separate from the standardization that we're trying to achieve with the attachment draft that is much more related to existing, like the existing robotics, RFC 930309. So what is happening in the meanwhile, like attachment mechanisms keep popping up. Like we have the Cloudflare launches content signals. You will see that AI train is something that looks like a term that is used in our sort of like in the current draft. Search is one that is used in the other draft, but that is radically different here than it is in our draft. AI input is something that we don't have in our draft yet, in our current draft. It roughly corresponds with the AI use that we referred to. Then there's interesting, this real simple licensing standard, which popped up over the summer, like I don't know when that actually came into. And what you are seeing here is how that looked 2 weeks ago. Where if you look closely, the type usage characteristics, all train AI, train Gen AI, AI use, and search are corresponding with our post-London draft that seems to have taken exactly from our document. There is a reference to the IETF AI usage preferences in there. Today, it looks like this. It doesn't reference the IETF anymore, and it sort of, for coincidence or not, it exactly mirrors the content signals from Cloudflare. So I think this is actually a relatively recent thing. It does add, in addition to the content signals from Cloudflare, it adds this all category, which is, I guess, taken from our draft still. But you see that there is a sort of a need for, like what the point here is, there is an enormous need with people trying to build these preference signaling mechanisms to find some way of aligning their different expressions to it. And we, as this working group, are currently failing them, risking that private efforts at standard setting undertaken by Cloudflare in this case might become like the de facto standard in this place. And I think this is our responsibility or our task here to avoid this situation and have something that comes out of these discussions here and that can serve this purpose. And I think it also shows that even this is broader than just a training preference, right? Like I haven't seen in any of the none of the things that are on this thing only have a training signal, right? Like all of them are much broader. Like some of them, I think IPTC Plus is the most most extensive of them, but CP2A also has a number of other ones, are more extensive than just a simple single training signal. So if we are going into the direction of just defining one thing at the moment, the likelihood of our effort serving its purpose, namely providing a vocabulary that can bring together these different efforts, I think diminishes, and they will look elsewhere. One last thing, I really think that sort of also it's very important for us to keep separate the discussion about the attachment draft and the vocabulary. And I want to make the point that the vocabulary, it has been stated in sort of like, I think in the London meeting on the mailing list repeated times, that there is a risk of legislators coming in and making the vocabulary mandatory. If you closely look, and that is generally then sort of under like reasoned by pointing to the recent EU Code of Conduct for GPA model providers. Apart from the fact that this is only a code of conduct for GPA model providers who train GPA models, so that's a small subset of like the users that we talk about. It is also important to see that that reference to what is generally considered to be a reference to our work in this group is, if you read closely, and that's under A there, a reference to the attachment mechanism, to robots.txt. To employ web crawlers that read and follow instructions expressed in accordance with robots exclusion protocol as specified, blah, 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 and any subsequent version of this protocol. This is not a reference to the vocabulary, this is a reference to the attachment mechanism. So like, I think it behooves us also, like there's been a lot of people arguing we should be extremely, extremely careful with what we're doing here because it will be retroactively or via the code of conduct given sort of the power of the law. At least your code of conduct is not doing that. And so I think that brings us back to the fact that these two things that we're working on are really like we do ourselves a favor of looking at them separately, independently, and sort of like the charter also does that, specifically calling out that the AI-related preferences are independent of how those preferences are associated with content. So the preference document maybe needs to be pared down a little bit on parts where we have sort of where it verges into the territory of becoming sort of like a mechanism for interpreting the preference. There's some stuff in there, and pare it down to really defining the categories and leaving any sort of like technical implementations to the attachment draft and to all the other attachment mechanisms that are out there. I don't know if this is helpful, but like for me, this is sort of maybe helps a little bit of compartmentalizing the discussions and really understanding what the external sort of pressures on this work are. And there are two. Like one is there is de facto standardization happening elsewhere. And the other thing is like this often pointed to risk of legislators hijacking somehow this process is, I would say at least the legislators who have dealt with this in the past, like have shown sort of quite a lot of constraint by being very specific about what they are referring to and in which context they think they can make these references. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Warren.
So, Warren Kamari. Yeah, I mean, this sort of leads into the should we focus on a minimal thing? And the reason I said yes is kind of because this de facto standardization that's happening. The whole XKCD of you start off with one standard and then you end up with a bunch. The content signals thing, when that came out, I was a little surprised as to how that's supposed to interact with this working group. Like it kind of felt like it was trying to, what could you say, preempt the work. but it is very confusing as to what that message sends. Is that we need something right now? Or is it we're going to do this regardless of what happens with the working group? I did read the email that was sent as well, but it does kind of feel like if something doesn't get done soon, maybe we end up with 14 different competing standards, and then it's unclear as to what has to. Yeah, sorry, that's a very good point, de facto standards. And so that's one of the sort of advantages to at least showing that work is happening here and that there is movement, even if it's not perfect, having something to demonstrate we can get something done, or hopefully preempt or cut off some of the others. And who need mics? Felix. Is there? Where the other mics?
I have it.
Okay.
But I'm next, or give it to Felix.
Yeah. You can deal with it.
Thanks, Paul. I think that was useful. Could you clarify one point?
Yes, sorry, is the mic open?
I don't know.
That's it, which we keep
Tech aside. I find it interesting, this point, is the vocabulary going to be part of the next iteration of robots exclusion protocol? And I would like to ask for clarification on that, because I think if it is, like you say, that basically the next iteration of REP is going to be the attachment mechanism, not the vocabulary, that would, I think, address some of the concerns. But doesn't the attachment mechanism have to say what vocabulary they're using? So the way that I always envisioned is there is a vocabulary, and then there are a bunch of different attachment mechanisms, and they say which vocabulary they are using by making reference to the vocabulary document. So I'm not really sure if it's possible to do it that way, to say, okay, robots exclusion protocol is only going to define how preferences are expressed in the context of robots.txt, but without making any reference to what those preferences actually are. I always thought of it as the vocabulary being the standardized preferences that all the attachment mechanisms make reference to, but not to say they are completely independent. So I'm not sure if it's as simple as you say that the code of practice has nothing to do with the vocabulary. So could you explain that a little further?
I'm not sure I can explain that with any authority, right? Like I'm not familiar enough with IETF procedures, how something would, like when something would be considered to be a successor thing. I sort of, and I think I started many of these discussions by sort of understanding the relationship between the two in the way that you have described them. And I think this sort of analysis that maybe there's value in thinking about them more as really independent things, as the charter says. And like I previously sort of not paid too much attention to that. It came from this RSL thing where they said, like, in the original version where they referenced the working group thing, they said like, oh, we're using a superset of these things. If you use a superset or maybe a subset of the things, like I think there's nothing that keeps us from, or keeps any attachment mechanism from, for example, saying like in the context of this attachment mechanism, we use X, Y, and Z, but not the fourth thing, because that doesn't make sense here, right? Like I don't, and this is not a fully formed thought, but like to some of the, I think there were some people pointing out on the mailing list, what is the value of the overarching all category if robots.txt already has a way of dealing with this by basically saying disallow all, maybe we define a vocabulary which constitutes an all category, but in the robots.txt attachment mechanism, sort of that does not, like they just don't map to that because it doesn't make sense in that context because it is served by something else. So and this is more sort of like at this stage creative thinking around, okay, what are ways of resolving some of the blockades and some of the sort of in this group than fully formed thought. And I I really can't answer either how sort of like that successor thing would be defined. Maybe like there's other people in the room, nor can I really confirm that my reading that I gave of the AI code of conduct, that I would think this applies to the attachment part and not necessarily the vocabulary draft, is the correct reading. But sort of it seems, on the basis of the text, it seems to be at least a possible reading, probably a likely one. So
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So just to make sure I understand you correctly. So what you're saying is the vocabulary could include categories that just don't make sense for the crawling context, but since they don't make sense for the crawling context, they would not be part of rep because the attachment mechanism for rep would not reference them?
I think that's something that we might want to explore if that solves some of our issues. Like I don't necessarily like it's not a fully formed like this is the way forward. It's more like an idea, and I think it might be worthy to explore.
So if I could just replace to make sure I understand, what you're saying is instead of saying, okay, here's the attachment mechanism and it references the vocabulary of the authoritative things that fill out the attachment mechanism, there's an intentional separation between them. And the attachment mechanism is generic and it says, well, this is where you can put a vocabulary of a particular shape in, but we don't talk about any particular vocabulary in this attachment mechanism. And that kind of implicitly leaves it up if some regulator wants to go and say, I'm going to put a legal requirement on this, they have to specify both the attachment and the vocabulary. Is that kind of where you're going?
No, I don't think like I think like the purpose would still be that the attachment references the vocabulary very specifically, says like we're using these terms. It's really like the RSL people did that in that previous version, which somebody probably told them was a little bit premature, and then they replaced it. But where they said we are using a superset of these things, right? Like they could also said, imagine a scenario where they would have done the same, where they're really just saying like we're using these terms in our data models in line with the definitions that are contained in that vocabulary document, and we're using those terms, and in their case, one extra. But in theory, like I don't know if that makes sense, but they could have also said like we're using 4 of their 5 terms the way they are described in the vocabulary. So if you use terms from the vocabulary, you use them in line how they are defined, but it might not be necessary to use all of them.
Did you nominate the ones you're going to use?
Yeah. Okay. That's what they did. Like right, like they had basically a list of permittable values for that one field in there, and it was longer than ours. Could have been shorter.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little less sanguine about like we don't have to be careful what we write here because they're really selective. I don't think that's true. Like the chance like lots of things are rubber stamped in ways that are unwise. So I think if we don't think it's important that we say things that are precise and accurate, then we should not bother saying anything at all, rather than say things that are fussy. I'm sort of like a little concerned with the vibe here that like we have to act super fast because other people are going to do things. It is always faster for companies to actually unilaterally than it is to follow standards. What makes standards work is the companies wait for the standard to be published, or they change the thing to match the standard when the standard is published. If we don't think companies are going to do that, then again we should go home because we're not going to like be Cloudflare to like put stuff on the internet. That's silly. That's not how things work. So like I'm not asking. I mean I understand workers for Cloudflare doesn't speak for them, but like if like Cloudflare other people are like, we don't care what the IETF says, and we're going.
They're down there, by the way.
Yeah, no, we're going it alone. Then like we have to assess whether this is a viable process. But like nothing we do is going to make that happen fast enough that if those guys want to go it alone, they're not going to. That's not how it works.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sorry, thank you.
Not at all. Now it's on. I think that all of those issues are real issues. But I think it's also true that if we can't agree on a vocabulary or a subset thereof to move forward with, none of the attachment stuff really matters. And I think that a lot of the technological issues around attachment, we have a bunch of smart technologists here. We could work through those if we had the vocabulary piece. I suspect that's why the draft agenda has 2 days for vocabulary and a half day for attachment.
Mike.
Given we're named, we are absolutely hoping to align to whatever this working group output is. So absolutely, that is our intent. And I wrote that in the mailing list as well. Regarding the urgency, we are hearing a lot from our customers, and there's definitely an urgency from the internet content creators as a whole. We are actively speaking to content publishers across the globe, and yes, of course, there's a push from them to help move this conversation forward. But we do want to align with the uploaders working group. I want to make that really, really clear.
Thank you. So regarding that urgency, I'll take us back to the fall we took. We had pretty much everyone, with very few exceptions, saying that they were willing to put a year into this. We didn't go further out than that. I guess we can if we want. It'd be nice not to take more than a year, but we might, So I guess, from my perspective at least, the question is, how do we use our time productively? How do we come to consensus on these things? Because in a consensus process, you need to have broad agreement. And that means the default is you're not doing anything. So what can we find that we can agree on to move forward with this? But I do think there are some promising discussions that we've started, but we need to figure out how to move forward with those. Trish?
Yeah, I actually do have something like, I agree with what Kevin said, right? But I do have a quick follow-up to it, right? Because part of the idea of focusing on the vocabularies, in addition to the attachment stuff, is that there's other attachment mechanisms that are outside the IETF. And the sooner we get done with the vocabulary, they can also start on it, because people can still talk about whether robots or text is appropriate or not, right? Because people do bring up that issue. But if you don't have the vocabulary done, then the other bodies where like JPEG or MPEG-4 or whatever is probably going to use the same vocabulary. So I think the vocabulary has 2 things, the attachment is useless without it. And the second thing is there's non-IETF attachment mechanisms that would also like to have the same vocabulary so we can combine things. So just to put a final point on that.
So that's actually one of my concerns, right? That I have a bunch of more technical objections to 9309 being used that way. This doesn't seem worth getting into until we have the other piece sorted out. I mean, if we can, I'm happy to, but.
Thank you. Stefano?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Sorry, I just didn't know when it was a good moment to intervene. My name is Stefano Gentile. I'm a member of the copyright unit of the European Commission. So just a quick word to thank everyone, the chair and the participants for the efforts and the contribution towards a common way to express AI preference. I'm sure you know, because you were discussing it just now, how the European Union has embarked in a regulatory framework for AI that takes also into account copyright aspect of generative models. Beside the legislative text, the European Commission wants to ensure that there is an effective expression and detection of preference from right owners. In this sense, establishing a common vocabulary for us is key to an unambiguous user-protected content, irrespective of the legal effects in any jurisdiction. And this is why we are observing with great interest the debate within this working group. I see that there are not necessarily a consensus on everything, and you're working this out, and this is very good. And obviously, I did not intervene earlier because this is not a European-driven process, and it makes sense that the debate is leads to a universal approach rather than being linked to a specific jurisdiction. After all, the internet has no boundaries. However, this is not to say that a common vocabulary with clear semantics will not also support European policies on copyright and AI. And I trust that this process will bring clear benefits to both right holders and technology companies. All stakeholders involved should benefit from increase legal certainty, and also this will also help operationalize the European copyright provisions of union opt-out, which I should remind, the formulation says that the opt-out needs to be expressed in an appropriate manner. So we should all benefit from a clearer way of expressing a preference, irrespective of whether this is leading to any legal consequences or not. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Stefano. Okay. What do you think? The issues list? So. So, let me move that camera perhaps.
It's very fuzzy.
Yeah, no, I'm struggling with multiple layers of screen sharing here, sorry. But how to make that go away so much. So I have 27 issues that were opened. And we went through, if we concentrate on the vocabulary for now, that's 23. And we put some labels on them just to kind of put them in different buckets. So we have the overall model of the vocabulary, and then ones for the individual preferences, the top level, the search, training, and the use. So perhaps we should go top down and talk about the overall model ones first. And I think these are mostly from Ecker and also from Krishna. So maybe let's go for the most generic one. I think we're two rather. These two are here, 159 and 170. Ecker, do you want to talk us through this one?
Try.
Sure. Microphone's two down, thank you.
Excellent. And I'm also having to pull it up, so. Second. Yeah, so I mean, I think people should start interrupting me quite early here, because I'm trying to say some things people disagree with, and me giving a long monologue doesn't really help us. A lot of what I was trying to say in this, this issue is, I think, reflective of some of the same kind of thesis that Krishna was advancing earlier, which is that when you drill down into people's objections to AI training, what you actually tend to get is a set of objections to the way that the data will then subsequently be used, rather than the objection to it being fed into the weights of some model. And that focusing on the uses gives you a better resolution on what people actually don't like, than focusing on the training thing. I want to cabin off for a second the issue I often hear raised about the load, about the bandwidth load on the target sites from training. We can talk about that, but it's a distinct question from, in some respects, from the question of from the question of the training itself, because the load would be objectionable in any case, regardless of how it was generated.
So in the spirit that you've encouraged.
Yes, please.
So when we were talking about use, for me, one of the things that was more convincing was this argument that use is so broad, it's like saying effectively, I don't want you to use my content with the Python programming language or with linked lists. It's kind of a nonsense. And so this is, I think, kind of the core of that purpose-based argument. It sounds like what you're saying is that is about that. And so I was starting to conceptualize that as, okay, that makes sense. But training is still kind of effectively its own special kind of use. sounds like you're taking that further and saying, well, no, there's not really this distinction between training time and use time, and so it's all.
I think that's sort of what I'm trying to argue. I guess, when I hear people complain about this, and I'm sure other people have had more of this than I have, what I hear is, well, they're like stealing my clicks, or they're taking my stuff and they're making things like my thing, and so now no one wants to buy my art, or those are the kind of things people complain about. It's not like it turned into a bunch of floating point numbers. That's not what people care about. And so the floating point numbers are a proxy for all those things. And so now maybe the case that we can't cleanly cabin off those things, in which case we do come back to the floating point thing. But I think that'd be unfortunate because, as I was saying earlier, there are, first of all, many of those same things people object to when they come out of like a bunch of floating point math, they objected to and they didn't come out of floating point math, number one. And number two, there's a lot of stuff which I suspect most content writers would not object to that did involve feeding a bunch of floating point math. And in particular, this is why the search thing has to be cabined off so much, because that also involves feeding in a bunch of models, but is then used in a way that is part of some implicit economic bargain with the sites, right? And so I just think it's very hard to kind of like analyze this from like this technical perspective of what it's being used for, as opposed to the perspective that I think is much more like reflective of why people are sad, which is the sort of implicit the breach of some like perceived or actual bargain between the sites and the people doing this script.
I agree with you. I think, and again, this is me personally. I agree with you for a lot of cases there, but there is a class of people who I think just don't want their data to be used in those models because they feel that that's a misuse of their data or their content. And I think the analogy here is in copyright, there's the personality rights. There's the arguments that I should control, my content, not because I have an economic interest, but because I'm personally involved in it. And that's not an American argument. The Americans don't really like that, but the Europeans do put some weight behind that.
Yeah, I think, and I guess maybe economics too narrow a term. I guess even my sense is, again, like I'm sure there are people who object to like if being used to influence model weights, but that when you actually push on people who have the objection, those sort of moral rights arguments really come down to stuff that even if it isn't economic, is still about the output of the model usage rather than going to model weights. I think maybe like one way to sort of, I think what I'm concerned about, as I said very early on, is that we provide a vocabulary that's so inexpressive that the consequence is that the only way to say, I don't want you like summarizing my data and putting it on, on AI overviews, is saying don't train. And now we've walled off, and now basically everyone just says that, and we've walled off a lot of useful stuff. So it may be the case. I think I would feel much more comfortable with this overall AI training category if I felt there were a set of other categories which were more, I thought were more expressive of what I conceived to be the actual objections that people could say. And then we have less of this sort of moral hazard that inadvertently say, just don't look at my stuff at all.
We're building a queue, so
yeah, please.
Not to say that we're done with your issue.
No, I think I'm basically done saying what I was going to say. So
that's not our issue for you. Okay, great. There you go. Right next to you.
So I think part of the problem is that there are so many things people want to achieve. We don't really know about what exactly they want. That's the problem we have here. And I think there is a risk that people would just say training no, because they want to achieve something and they don't understand what it is. And that's why we have the discussion here. But I want to, I think there is one point where people say, I just don't want you to use my data in any way because I don't like your company. I don't like whatever you're producing. It's not about actually doing something with my data that copies my data or copies my style or whatever. It's really just about not using my data generally because I don't agree with what you're doing.
But robots already says that. Robots. Right. That's robots, yes.
Right.
So then you say you shouldn't just scroll me at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
But maybe.
Pedro.
Or not.
Maybe.
So maybe I already said a little bit about this in the beginning, but I think this so far like from a technical point of view, seems like the most sensible approach right now, like to talk more about use than to actually talk about the underlying implementation of these technologies. I know, I mean, there were some concerns that were raised there, like for instance, saying like, okay, the use can be extremely broad. I think, to be fair, we can probably make a very good survey of like what people are actually concerned of. Because, okay, so the thing that changed with LLMs or MLMs is that they were capable of doing certain things in mass that were not possible before. But that's still you. And there are going to be technologies in a couple of months, couple of years that are also going to have those capabilities that might have other implementations. So I actually think that it's better to try to understand what are these new uses of people's data that these models are doing, and that is probably more that's probably going to be more stable in time than actually talking about AI or I don't know, search overviews or AI overviews in search. I mean, the reason why I say that is because even search, and this is something that I have seen in the discussion, search is going to be extremely difficult to define because most of the search engines today use exactly the same models in the underlying technology. So when you're looking at classical search, that's just another implementation of the AI overview. It's a little bit less robust, it's a little bit more lightweight, but it's still the same implementation as the AI overviews. So saying, hey, don't retrain a model, or don't use my data to train model weights is also going to have consequences from a technological point of view in how your data is visible in search. So again, I think this use, at least from a technical point of view, makes far more sense than how the vocabulary, like the previous definitions in the vocabulary were. Um, yeah, that's more or less the opinion.
Paul?
Thank you. I want to continue playing like a little bit the sort of historical knowledge of this group. I don't think it's accurate to say that people are not concerned about the training uses, and I don't think it's also useful to frame things and only saying no to things. Like I think there is on the side of many rights holders and content owners, not a desire to say no, but the desire to say no in order to engage in discussions about payment. And I think there is the expectation that if you can say no, that you can somehow negotiate deals for getting paid for data to be used for training. And I think that is that underpins much of the European discussion at the moment. Notice that this is with regards to training of generative AI models only, but I think that's a more widespread thing. We sort of don't need to go back, like the legal situation is very different across the world. But it is not only what we're doing here, like building means to object to things, but it also building a system which individuals and entities will use in order to establish a negotiation position. And I think particularly in that context, the training discussion is still very relevant. It is clear that the sort of by focusing on the training thing, where it has become clear through these discussions that only focusing on the training thing does not address all of the issues and maybe some of the more by now more salient issues that exist in this space. But that doesn't mean that we can simply declare that something that was only relevant in the past and is not relevant anymore.
Michael.
I wanted to echo Eric, if I'm not mistaken, what you said. 100%. There were actually discussions in London with proposals with subcategories, because I do agree there's a risk that people would just say no to the broad category, and that's why we actually had proposed and introduced a number of subcategories for the exceptions. Because there are some very bad, as far as we're speaking to content publishers, there's some really good use cases that people still want to opt in. So I just wanted to echo Eric's sentiment.
Irina.
Thank you. I think it is really hard to sort of like be able to map with enough granularity the expectations, I guess, of content owners, because I guess what counts as misuse is not like fixed in time. And I think that's one challenge with the vocabulary, that basically things change in an economic sense, technology changes, companies might behave in a different way. And then sort of like it's really hard with the static taxonomy to capture all those emerging changes. And I think a possible direction, which I guess may be diverging from the current conversation, but I just wanted to put it out there, is the idea of life preferences. So being able at sort of like whenever a new use case emerges, that the AI provider, for example, would basically just like ask for permission at the time of use. Would it be like a special exception to basically what the existing taxonomy might be able to capture? And that might be able to sort of like be more flexible over time.
And Corinne?
Yeah, so I've heard different points of view about what content owners and site operators want to express preferences about. I think, Eric saying that training is not so important, Cloudflare taking a different view there. And I think this is a kind of topic that it's very difficult for this group in the meeting to be representative of, because it is so widespread and much less. I think there's a broader range of possibilities than in some technical issues like attachment. So I just wanted to toss out the idea that what the outside world wants to express preferences about is an empirical question. And we might conduct a study or do something to solicit that feedback from the broader public, rather than rely on our own anecdotal experiences of what people have told us.
Pedro.
Yeah, so maybe something about training in particular is that, I actually agree that people are still interested about the specific opt-out of training, but something that probably we have to be very clear on is that the training, the only thing that is generating at the end is the model. And the model can do multiple things. So, for instance, one thing that I already said previously is that most of search engines already use the same models that are used for generative AI. So you could potentially take one of these models that was trained for search to encode things in vectors and then loop things on a database. So the same thing is being done for text generation. So you could potentially just take that model and then start generating text with it. So the model, when you pre-train it, it can have a lot of uses. And one thing is that I agree we can have the category of, let's say, AI training, but one thing that we have to convey to right holders, data owners, like webmasters, people that are concerned about this category in particular, is that if you opt out of a category like that is quite broad, like this is probably going to have some impact in the end. So one example was search as well, because there's no such thing as classical search and AI search. like the technology has been advancing quite a lot, even though you have seen like search engines using the same front end. Like the technology is different. The thing that is changing is, I mean, sorry, the thing that remained the same in what people call classical search is just the front end and how the information is presented to you. So this is again something that we have to be careful on and probably convey to these people.
There are more microphones. Do you want me to get them?
So
Keep it hot there.
I'd like to suggest actually a next step here. So I mean, this issue is kind of me whining, and it seems to me like what might be useful here would be if Krishna is willing to do a presentation of his ideas. I'm not saying we shouldn't do an adoption call or anything like that, but I think it'd be useful intuition to see a different perspective that is constructive submission rather than kind of like complaining about the current thing. And I see it's almost lunchtime, so maybe you could have that sometime later.
Well, and that was going to be, considering the Q, that was going to be my follow-up question. Is do you have a concrete proposal and then to move to Krishna and his thoughts?
No, I have a proposal that we should do a concrete proposal. So sounds like I have one.
Okay, good. I've got Martin and then Suresh, and it is getting towards lunch. Gary, what time is lunch being delivered? You know? 3. And okay.
Lunch is already.
MT.
Yeah, so apparently lunch is already sitting outside, so don't bother checking, Darren. Someone's already checked. So I think the question of whether or not we can measure things, Karen suggested that we potentially would be able to go off and empirically measure whether or not people want certain things or not. I don't think we've answered even the top level question. I think that's, to me, more important here than that. The question is, for me, should we allow people to express preferences about things? And I'm struggling with that a little bit because I think the answer is yes, but that seems to be not the case based on people's opinions. I'd like greater clarity about that before we proceed. I think we can talk about the top level category much more constructively if we talk about that and recognize in the context of preferences. But obviously that's a hot topic.
So you're asking.
I suggest we do that as after we've had Christian's one, because I do think that's a constructive.
And so you're asking, should people be able to express preferences regardless of consequences, so long as those preferences are well expressed?
So yeah, I think this applies to any preference that you might express, and I don't think it matters at what scope. We have a lot of people suggesting that this particular preference would be problematic for some reason because it's vague or unspecified or too broad. I don't even know what broad means in this context, what it means to be too broad, that is. And I'd like to get to the bottom of that discussion at some point this afternoon, perhaps, because I don't think it matters what the specific thing is attached to. There's a question about what it means to express a preference that we really haven't gotten to the bottom of yet, or it seems that we haven't, which I find a little disappointing.
So that kind of suggests a schedule for the rest of the day, lunchtime, come back, have the same discussion we just had with Ecker, with Krishna and his top level issues, and especially about his draft, which he's currently prepared. And then once we exhaust that, maybe put a pin in what you just brought up and come back to that.
Sure, yeah, sounds good. So there's like one potential hole I want to bring up right now, because like Ecker, when you talked about like, how it's getting used and whether it's like substitution, right? Like, so I think we did explore it at some meeting before, like what is considered substitutive, and we couldn't get agreement, right? Like I'll give you an example. So let's say Google does like a summary of something, right? Google thinks it's not substitutive because people are gonna like follow the link on the bottom of it to your thing, but some content providers are like they lost like 78% of traffic or 80%, right? I think that is like one potential thing we need to look out for, even though it's like clear to us, like we are trying to avoid substitution, right, is what we're trying to avoid, and that's how somebody's expressing it. People might not be able to see it the same way depending on where you're sitting. So that's one thing which kind of blocked us off following the path before. So I just want to bring it up, like keep it in mind when we go look at it further. Thanks.
Sure. I mean, I'm not making a cue here, but I'll still respond. I mean, that's certainly a real concern, you know, and I'm aware that there's some debate about like the specific question of AI overviews. I mean, I think I guess my concern is precisely the same set of concerns in these current categories, right? That, I mean, you know, our job is to produce a set, taking a step for even further back. Our task is to produce a set of preferences which are sufficiently expressive and orthogonal that sites can say approximately what they want to say, and not say things they don't want to say. That's that's our task, right? And so I don't know how to do that necessarily, or would have a proposal, but that is my underlying concern: is are we allowing sites to say what they want to say and not say things they don't want to say?
Yeah.
And you have the last word.
Yeah.
If you have a mic, or I can run you one.
Oh.
Gotcha.
Oh, that's running.
Yeah, so I felt like I should respond to the air.
You might want to turn the microphone on.
Okay. So I want to make sure this group does not unduly focus on one particular product and one particular instantiation, because that will lead to rules that do not work for many other things. And in the spirit of that, if I can demo some like of the future things we are experimenting with, maybe this afternoon or later in the workshop, I think it would be helpful to give the group an idea of like why we are so concerned about the line drawing here.
So let's try to start talking. We'll see if we can maybe accommodate that. If not in the official sessions, but maybe in the lunchtime or you know, maybe at the end of the day. But we'll figure something.
I think that sounds like good. I think at least like Gary's session about like how Google search works in crawlers was like very useful for people for context. So either like depending on if you want to use it like so I think it really depends on whether you think it's going to cause some breakthrough on like somebody, right? It's really the question, like do we use it time? Okay. Yep. So I think like maybe then we should find time for it. Like,
I'm just a little wary of using working group meeting time for stuff that's not directly within our scope, but I see it has a lot of implications here. So maybe at the end of the day today, if that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And I think between MT and Ecker, maybe not surprisingly, we have two kind of bookends to an interesting part of the discussion, which is separating motivation for whether we do things or not based upon their consequences, and then separating whether we do things or not based upon whether they're accurate descriptions or accurate, you know, portrayals of people's actual preferences. And that's, to me, a really interesting line to walk.
We don't know each other well, so we'll have trouble discussing it.
Yeah. You two just go in a room and come back and tell us when you're done. So it's almost noon local time. Let's take just a little more than an hour for lunch. Let's have some nice conversations over lunch, because that's frankly a lot of value of coming to the same place. We'll meet back here and let's be ready to start at 1 p.m. local time. Remote folks who are in odd time zones, I apologize for the extended delay there. Hopefully we'll see you back in about an hour. And lunch is up. Oh, and the other thing with lunch, we do have a number of folks with dietary constraints and that have had special meals ordered for them. So please be very conscious when you pick up a meal that you're not picking one of those up by mistake. It's not for you. So in about an hour. Remote folks, also in an hour, we will be using a different MeetEcho link. It is in the agenda for the afternoon on the first day. Just realize it's a different link. Thanks.